Good afternoon and welcome to episode 5 of Inside Out, a monthly webcast where Thinka's co-founders and respective COO and CEO, Ben and Lee, talk through all the weird and wonderful, hard and human parts of business and leadership. Today, we're focusing on 3 big questions. How do you manage people when they don't respond to feedback? What do you do when your direct reports can't see their deficiencies? And how do you have tough conversations but maintain the relationship? We also get a couple of questions through on the registration form, which we'll cover here too. How do you bridge the gap from having a really good relationship with your team and then having to give them honest, tough feedback about their performance? How can I incrementally get better at managing people? How do you navigate feedback when you're a divergent staff? And tips for taking on staff in other departments who don't like change.
I'm going to tell you a little story about my lunchtime walk yesterday. So I left my house, as I usually do, with my 2 big, beautiful, and very dopey golden retrievers. And we took a little bit of a spin around the lake, full of the joy of life. Sun was shining. Anyway, unfortunately, the dogs got a little tangled up and I dropped the leads to untangle them. But the very stubborn boy dog, Monty his name is, decided to head straight for the lake. And in he goes, and then Kirby, his sister, followed him. And nearby there was a councilman mowing the lawn. Anyway, he saw this and he came sprinting over and he absolutely went through me about how this was not an off-leash area and there's wildlife in the lake and da-da-da-da-da, like very excessive and, highly charged reaction. A few years ago, once upon a time, I would have been absolutely petrified by his response, and I would have worried that I'd done something really wrong, that I'd broken the law, that, I would have matched his energy in terms of excessiveness. Full amygdala hijack, shaking, heart racing. And in that moment, I was just really calm. And I just said, I think you're being ridiculous. This is a very excessive reaction. I said, the dogs will come out. Just be patient. They'll come out. I reflected on it later, preparing for today's podcast, and I thought, once upon a time, I would have behaved completely different in that moment. And I would have been seething and raging when I got home. And I would have been on the phone to everyone who would listen about this crazy man who had tried to capture my dog in a net and all the rest of it. But I just kept calm. I regulated. I just told him what I thought very directly, but without emotion, and didn't match his energy. And I think for me, that moment signaled that I've, really come a long way in those moments, in those really uncomfortable moments. And I felt like there was a good relationship between that example and then what we do in feedback conversations. We imagine feedback conversation is going to be like that conversation, really emotional, highly charged and difficult. And some of them are, let's be fair, especially if it's a tough conversation around really poor performance. But you have a choice how you respond in that moment.
When I was 21, I was receiving an annual performance review. I was a pretty high performer and I was at Woolworths at the time. And I sat down opposite the person. I remember the room, the lighting, the environment as clear as day because of the impact of the feedback. And we sat down, and before anything had even been said, it looked like I was defensive. Didn't even say anything yet. And the conversation was first opened and the person paused and said, hey, I'm just going to call this behavior out before we even start. Believe there's some defensiveness in the room. I think we just need to really work with that before we go anywhere. And I listened, but I couldn't change. It's like the two weren't connected at that point. I was having an out-of-body experience, but I really wanted to because my face was still saying I'm defensive. The conversation really never started. So we actually never had the performance review because I couldn't get over this strong reaction I was emulating of this defensiveness. So we didn't start, we didn't finish, nothing was said. And from that moment, I have absolutely known that what is being said on my face and what my body reactions are sometimes very different to what's going on in my brain, where I can actually be very open as well. So I've gotten better at regulating or keeping the two aligned. But I would never have known that. I would never have had that experience if someone had not have said to me, we're not going to progress any further until you can kind of get that defensiveness in check. I think that's a very brave leader that does that and just calls it and doesn't entertain it and just says, this is what I'm saying. Let's work with that first. I remember the person's name, the impact of the feedback. And the funny thing is, I had that particular leader be a reference for me when I left that organization and moved on to the next one, and they told the next person, "Oh, very strong defensive mechanism, and you just got to be very aware of that when delivering feedback." And the person that hired me was never perturbed by it because they knew about it, and it was just that's how that person responds. It was very clinical, and I'm like, oh, that's a piece of gold in there for me.
Yeah.
But also a piece of gold as leaders, just to understand when you're navigating emotions, yours and others, get yourself in check. If you can do that, whatever environment you're going in to manage, you'll be better equipped to.
Yeah, I agree. I think what's important there is the giving feedback on how the person needs to receive feedback, like, and being brave enough to actually stop and not progress any further and just focus squarely on that, because a lot of the time it's the meta skills that get in the way, like
Mhm.
because it can feel like you're speaking an entirely different language sometimes when you're in a feedback conversation to the other person.
The reality is, you could spend hours talking about just reactions to feedback or
Yeah,
just
100%.
trying to get people to understand it. You can run a workshop on defensiveness because these things are conditioning from experiences we've had through our years, whether that be, careers that we've had, whether that be early childhood, whether that be something that happened in our youth. They all impact our ability to receive feedback and how we're going to respond.
Your job as a leader isn't just to give the feedback. Your job is to make sure that it's integrated by the person, that it shows up in their role, that it becomes a part of their almost work character. So once that process is complete, your job is done as a leader. And I always think about that saying that drove us as teachers. Once you're sick of saying it, they're finally hearing it.
Yeah.
And it may not be that you're saying it exactly. It may be that, you attach them to a bit of training or a resource, or you bring someone else in to kind of help move the behavior along if they've got a particular strength or skill, whatever the feedback is about. There are lots of ways to give feedback without giving feedback. I think we've got to be a bit more open to lots of different options. Sometimes written feedback can be a lot easier, particularly for neurodivergent individuals, because they consume it in their own time in a private place. They can have that emotional reaction, let it out, let it settle before they come back and debrief it. And it works so well. And typically, we're always kind of thinking it has to be verbal, it has to be a face-to-face conversation. Why? We
Yeah.
live in a digital age. Why? The evidence suggests that fast, focused, and frequent feedback is really important to performance. People, I think it's 80% of employees, according to Gallup, believe that frequent feedback is important and central to higher performance. So it isn't just one annual performance review every year, or feedback in your one-to-one, fortnightly or monthly, or how often you do them. It's the little bits that you can offer in the context, just in time, that will really help to kind of cultivate the behavior you're looking for, I think.
What was the three F's? Fast, focus, and frequent.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh,
I like that.
sorry, there's one more: future orientated.
I like it. What we always need to come back to is helping people understand where they need to be, what the current level of gap might be. So we use the term performance perception gap. If there is a difference in performance between what the leader believes and what the team member believes, but also if there's a deficiency gap. So they just can't or won't see exactly where that deficiency is, and they feel like they need to just move to comfortable more than sitting in uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
what I think is important here is being on the same page, quite literally, is about don't faff around the conversation. Say this is where you need to be, but also find ways if they are someone that is maybe inclined to respond better to other people, or maybe to peer mentoring or whatever it might be, just to bring other influences into the conversation. Because
Yeah.
we're not doing the right person by that thing if we're keeping them in the role, whether it's a deficiency gap and not getting to rise to the occasion, because other people are having to work harder as a result of that. So you've absolutely got to go, what's the uncomfortable truth right now that I need to use to move this particular person? I think it's also important here to consider to not outsource the awkward. And I like to say that term because I think it's happened to me multiple times where feedback needs to come to me, but it's gone around me. And it's like, hey, if you can see a behavior happening in a team with a particular person, if they're not aware about it and you're talking about it, you're doing a disservice to that particular person. Or if you're having to talk to others, you're outsourcing your awkward, because who the person is you need to talk to is the person you're talking about. Often we feel the need to offset any negative emotion with something more positive or something more optimistic. So we'll be in a conversation, you hear that in that exact conversation where they've got, oh, at least you come in at third place. It's like, that's that other person wanting to relinquish any form of discomfort and move to a more positive mindset or positive emotion at that point. You can actually just sit in discomfort for a moment. In fact, that's inevitably what will end up moving someone, because they don't want to sit there anymore. So when we've all been there, we've been in a meeting with a team of people and we're talking about some challenging behaviors or maybe some results that aren't great. And we'll often hear things like, oh, but at least we're doing X well, or this is really great. And it's that offset thing that can be damaging, because what do you do in that moment? You go and attach to the positive and you don't actually sit in the challenge, which often moves you.
Yeah, I think for me, maintaining the relationship, it really is about that sensitivity, showing up authentically in the moment, caring about the person, or that radical candor approach, caring personally but challenging directly. That's kind of the key. And I think we get that if we kind of adopt that Olympic runner approach, where we really are talking to that person about feedback as something that is going to elevate performance and coming at it from that angle.
Love it.